The death of a child is an event that tears at the fabric of human existence, leaving behind a void that can never be truly filled. When that death is the result of deliberate violence, the pain is compounded by a sense of outrage and a desperate need to understand the incomprehensible. The circumstances surrounding the death of 13-month-old Amora Bain Carson in Rusk County, Texas, in December 2008 represent a particularly disturbing and tragic case study in the depths of human depravity and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked delusion. This is a comprehensive and detailed chronicle of the events that led to this unfathomable loss, a narrative constructed from the threads of distorted beliefs, escalating violence, and the systemic failures that converge to leave a vulnerable child unprotected. It is a story that demands to be told, not for the purposes of sensationalism or morbid fascination, but as a solemn testament to the fragility of innocence and an urgent call for unwavering vigilance in safeguarding the lives of the most defenseless among us. Amora Bain Carson was born on November 12, 2007. A radiant presence in the life of her young mother, Jessica Carson. Jessica, who was a teenager at the time of Amora's birth, embraced the responsibilities of motherhood with a remarkable sense of devotion and protectiveness. Amora's biological father, Arlen Mutina, was serving overseas in the military, and his relationship with Jessica eventually dissolved. Despite the absence of a traditional family structure, Amora thrived under Jessica's care, demonstrating a spirited nature and achieving developmental milestones with notable alacrity. In January 2008, Jessica's life took a fateful turn when she crossed paths with Blaine Keith Millam. Millam, 18 years old at the time, exuded an aura of confidence and affection, and the two quickly became deeply involved in a romantic relationship. Their connection deepened rapidly, culminating in an engagement on prom night, a moment marked by tears of joy and the promise of a shared future. Millam appeared to readily embrace the role of a father figure to young Amora, forging a bond that seemed, at least on the surface, to be characterized by genuine affection and care. Accounts from acquaintances and family members suggest that Amora's first word was "daddy," a poignant detail that underscores the depth of the connection she formed with Millam. This seemingly idyllic picture of a young family in formation, however, concealed disquieting undercurrents that would eventually surface with tragic consequences. Whispers and observations hinted at a darker side to Millam's personality. Some accounts suggested that he could be abusive and controlling in his relationship with Jessica, casting a shadow of domestic discord over their shared life. These undercurrents, initially subtle, would later emerge as significant warning signs tragically overlooked in the unfolding drama. Adding another layer of complexity to the narrative was Millam's troubling criminal history. Prior to his involvement with Jessica, Millam had committed a deeply disturbing offense, breaking into the home of an 11-year-old girl whom he knew from being homeschooled. His actions involved leaving behind pornographic materials accompanied by sexually suggestive notes, a clear attempt to solicit the young girl. While Millam never physically harmed the girl, his actions were deemed serious enough to warrant legal intervention. He was convicted of criminal solicitation of a minor under 14 and placed on the sex offender registry, a designation that carried with it significant restrictions. Millam's sentence included a term of 180 days in jail, a punishment intended to hold him accountable for his actions and protect the community. However, he was released on work release after serving only 48 days, a decision that would later be viewed with critical hindsight. When Millam and Jessica subsequently moved from their apartment in Longview, Millam failed to update law enforcement with his new address, a violation of his registration requirements that resulted in authorities losing track of his whereabouts. This oversight had dire implications, as it meant that Millam was not only out of compliance with the law, but also in violation of restrictions that explicitly prohibited him from being in close proximity to children. Tragically, it was revealed that Millam should have been incarcerated on the very day that Amora's life was brutally extinguished. This detail underscores the profound systemic failures that contributed to the tragedy, raising troubling questions about the effectiveness of the legal system in protecting vulnerable children. The trajectory of Jessica and Blaine's relationship took a sinister and disturbing turn in the spring of 2008 when they began experimenting with a Ouija board. This seemingly innocuous act, often associated with teenage games and harmless curiosity, opened a door to a world of delusion and paranoia, a descent into irrationality that was tragically exacerbated by their concurrent use of illegal substances. Jessica, still grappling with the deep emotional scars of her father's suicide when she was just 10 years old, sought solace and connection through the Ouija board, hoping to establish contact with his spirit and find a measure of peace. Blaine, too, was mourning the loss of his father, with whom he reportedly shared a close and significant bond. Blaine had dropped out of school after the 4th grade, and his father had taken on the role of homeschooling him from that point forward. The Ouija board, in their increasingly distorted perception, became a conduit to the afterlife, a channel through which messages from beyond the veil were transmitted. However, their interpretation of these messages grew progressively warped and detached from reality, fostering an environment of suspicion, paranoia, and irrational belief. Jessica, for instance, came to believe that her own mother was somehow responsible for her father's death, a deeply damaging and unfounded belief allegedly fueled by the pronouncements of the Ouija board. This delusion created a significant rift between Jessica and her mother, further isolating her from her family and eroding her support network. As their involvement with the Ouija board deepened, Jessica and Blaine's perception of the world around them became increasingly distorted and untethered from reality. They became convinced that malevolent forces, demons, or other supernatural entities had infiltrated their lives, taking possession not only of themselves, but also of young Amora and their shared apartment. This escalating paranoia and delusional belief system prompted them to abandon their Longview apartment and move into a trailer home owned by Blaine's mother in Tatum, Texas. The move, however, did not provide the respite or clarity they sought. Instead, their conviction in demonic possession intensified, creating a fertile ground for the horrific events that were soon to unfold. The couple's departure from their Longview apartment left behind a scene of squalor and neglect, a stark reflection of their deteriorating mental and emotional state. Rotting food filled the refrigerator, a knife was hidden in the toilet tank, and drug paraphernalia lay scattered about the residence, painting a disturbing picture of chaos and instability. Blaine's mother provided further insight into his background, revealing that he had a history of methamphetamine use and that he had struggled with emotional regulation, remaining emotionally immature. The loss of his father had profoundly affected him, contributing to his emotional volatility and instability. Some sources have also suggested that Jessica may have been experiencing postpartum psychosis, a serious mental health condition that can trigger delusions and hallucinations in the period following childbirth. The convergence of these factors, substance abuse, emotional instability, the trauma of loss, and potential mental health issues, created a perfect storm, a breeding ground for the horrifying delusions that would ultimately lead to Amora's tragic and untimely death. By December 2008, the couple's delusions had metastasized, reaching a critical and catastrophic point. Their irrational conviction that Amora was possessed by demons had solidified into an unshakable and dangerous belief. In their distorted reality, they became convinced that a violent exorcism was the only way to save Amora from the perceived demonic influence. This belief, fueled by irrationality, substance abuse, and a complete detachment from the bounds of reason, led to an act of unspeakable violence and cruelty. On December 1, 2008, Blaine, driven by his delusional conviction, subjected Amora to what he chillingly termed an exorcism. Jessica, tragically and incomprehensibly, did not intervene to protect her daughter from the horrifying ordeal. The exorcism extended for an agonizing 30 hours, during which Amora endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of the very people who should have been her protectors. The following morning, instead of seeking immediate and critical medical attention for Amora, who was gravely injured and in dire need of help, Jessica and Blaine callously and inexplicably went about their day as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. They engaged in mundane and ordinary activities, stopping at a pawn shop to sell an item for cash and then proceeding to a gas station to refuel their car. This behavior defies comprehension and underscores the profound detachment from reality that had taken hold of them. It wasn't until 10:37 a.m. on December 2, 2008, long after Amora had succumbed to her injuries, that Blaine placed a frantic 911 call, claiming to have discovered Amora's lifeless body. The delay in seeking help further compounded the tragedy and raised serious questions about their culpability. Emergency responders arrived at the trailer home to confront a scene that defied comprehension and tested the limits of their professional experience. Amora's lifeless body lay in a hole in the bathroom floor, which was in the process of being remodeled, a grim tableau that spoke volumes about the circumstances of her death. The injuries inflicted upon her were extensive, horrific, and utterly inconsistent with any accidental explanation, revealing the brutality and sustained nature of the abuse she had endured. The medical examiner who performed Amora's autopsy described her injuries as the worst he had ever seen inflicted upon a child. The autopsy revealed a catalog of suffering. Amora had sustained at least 18 broken ribs, indicating severe blunt force trauma to her chest. Her tiny skull was fractured so extensively that the cracks resembled shattered glass, and her brain was torn and severely damaged. Her left arm and leg exhibited spiral fractures, injuries typically caused by violent twisting. Adding to the horror, Amora's small body was covered in at least 24 distinct human bite marks. Her head and face were so severely bruised and scraped that the injuries had merged into one massive wound. Internal bleeding around her eyes and neck suggested that she had likely been strangled. Even the tissue beneath her tongue was torn, a sign of severe trauma. The examination of Amora's lower body revealed further evidence of unspeakable cruelty. The injuries in that region were extensive and consistent with an assault involving a foreign object. The sheer number and severity of Amora's injuries made it impossible for the medical examiner to pinpoint a single cause of death. Several of the injuries, on their own, could have been fatal. Initially, Jessica and Blaine attempted to mislead investigators with a web of lies and fabricated stories, denying any involvement in Amora's death. They offered conflicting accounts, claiming at one point that they had left Amora sleeping and returned to find her deceased, and at another point suggesting that her injuries were the result of a car accident. They even went so far as to suggest that the family dogs might have attacked Amora, a claim that was quickly disproven. However, detectives quickly recognized the inconsistencies in Jessica and Blaine's statements. Their stories kept shifting, and evidence from Amora's autopsy contradicted their timeline of events. It became clear that Amora's injuries had been inflicted earlier than the time Blaine placed the 911 call. A crucial piece of evidence emerged in the form of surveillance footage from a local pawn shop. The footage captured Jessica and Blaine calmly browsing DVDs and pawning items at 9:03 a.m. on December 2nd. This was less than 2 hours before Blaine's frantic 911 call, and medical evidence indicated that Amora had already died by this point. The couple's casual demeanor in the pawn shop, while Amora's lifeless body lay in their home, was deeply disturbing and cast further doubt on their claims of innocence. Additional surveillance footage from a gas station time-stamped 9:17 a.m. showed Jessica and Blaine again acting normally, purchasing a soda and cigarettes. Blaine's 911 call did not come until 10:37 a.m., over an hour later, during which he and Jessica feigned panic and distress. Further investigation of the trailer home revealed the scene of the crime and uncovered additional evidence that solidified the case against Jessica and Blaine. Investigators found illegal substances and a propane torch within the trailer. They also discovered that Amora had been killed in a front bedroom. In a chilling attempt to deceive investigators, Jessica and Blaine had staged a fake crime scene, using fake Halloween blood to mislead authorities. However, this deception was ultimately unsuccessful, and investigators were able to piece together the true sequence of events. 2 days after the discovery of Amora's body, Blaine contacted a relative from jail and asked her to help him retrieve and dispose of an item he had hidden under the house. Instead of assisting him, the relative alerted the sheriff, leading to the discovery of a pipe wrench wrapped in plastic. Forensic tests revealed traces of lubricant on the wrench that matched residue found on Amora's diaper, further implicating Blaine in the assault. Investigators also found signs that Amora had been restrained with ropes or cords based on patterns observed on her clothing. A forensic odontologist, Dr. Robert Williams, conducted a thorough analysis of the bite marks found on Amora's body. He compared dental impressions from Blaine, Jessica, and Blaine's brother. The results of this analysis were damning. At least 8 of the bite marks were definitively matched to Blaine's dental records. Jessica was linked to at least 1 bite mark, while Blaine's brother was excluded as a source. Dr. Williams noted the unusual nature of Blaine's bite, which made it easier to identify him as the perpetrator. The evidence painted a clear and horrifying picture of the events leading to Amora's death, dismantling Jessica and Blaine's lies and revealing the brutal reality of their actions. The weight of the evidence and the sheer brutality of Amora's suffering demanded justice. The legal proceedings that followed were marked by intense emotion and the collective desire to hold those responsible accountable for their heinous crimes. Blaine Keith Millam was charged with capital murder, a charge reserved for the most egregious crimes, reflecting the severity of his actions and the profound loss of Amora's life. Due to the extensive media coverage and the intense public outrage surrounding the case, Blaine's trial was moved to a different county to ensure that an impartial jury could be selected. The selection process was arduous, with a large pool of potential jurors being questioned to weed out any biases that might prejudice the proceedings. The courtroom became a somber stage as the harrowing details of Amora's ordeal were meticulously presented. The medical examiner's testimony provided a graphic and disturbing account of the violence inflicted upon the defenseless child, leaving a palpable sense of shock and grief in the room. Jurors were visibly shaken by the photographic evidence, forced to confront the stark reality of Amora's suffering. The prosecution built a compelling case against Millam, carefully connecting him to the crime through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the timeline established by surveillance footage. The evidence included the matching bite marks, the discovery of the pipe wrench used in the assault, and the video footage that captured Jessica and Blaine's callous behavior in the hours after Amora's death. The defense team attempted to portray Millam as intellectually impaired, suggesting that he had a low IQ and was easily manipulated, arguing for a lesser sentence. They also tried to attribute his actions to the influence of methamphetamine use and his lack of education. However, the jury was unmoved by these arguments, finding them insufficient to excuse the brutality of his crimes. In May 2010, after careful deliberation, the jury found Blaine Keith Millam guilty of capital murder. The verdict carried with it the possibility of the death penalty, and after a separate sentencing phase, the jury determined that execution was the appropriate punishment for his heinous acts. Jessica Carson also faced trial for her role in Amora's death. Her defense was complicated by her inconsistent and shifting accounts of the events, as well as her attempts to minimize her own culpability. Despite her claims of being manipulated and controlled by Millam, the court held her accountable for her inaction and complicity in the crime. The fact that one of the bite marks on Amora's body was matched to Jessica's dental impression further implicated her in the violence. Jessica's testimony revealed the disturbing depths of the couple's delusions and their distorted perception of reality. She described their experimentation with the Ouija board, their growing paranoia, and their conviction that Amora was possessed. Her attempts to explain her inaction were met with skepticism, as the jury struggled to comprehend how a mother could stand by while her child was subjected to such horrific abuse. Ultimately, Jessica Carson was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected her role in the tragic events. The legal aftermath of Amora's death extended beyond the initial trials. Millam's death sentence faced numerous appeals and stays of execution. These legal challenges highlighted the complexities of capital punishment and the ongoing debate surrounding its application, particularly in cases involving questions of intellectual disability. The death of Amora Bain Carson left an enduring scar on the Rusk County community and beyond. The details of the case were so profoundly disturbing that they prompted widespread grief, outrage, and a collective sense of disbelief. In the wake of the tragedy, there were urgent calls for systemic change and a more effective safety net to protect vulnerable children from abuse. The community grappled with difficult questions about the failures that allowed Millam, a registered sex offender with a history of concerning behavior, to be in close contact with Amora. There was a growing awareness that Amora's death might have been preventable if the existing systems had functioned more effectively. Amora's story became a symbol, a stark and tragic reminder of the ever-present threat of child abuse and the urgent need for heightened vigilance. Her memory served as a catalyst for increased awareness, prompting individuals and organizations to redouble their efforts to safeguard children from harm and to advocate for stronger child protection measures. A small copper heart in Rosewood Park Cemetery now marks Amora's final resting place. It is a poignant and heartbreaking reminder of a life cut short, a symbol of innocence lost to unimaginable cruelty. The memorial serves as a place for reflection and remembrance, a space where the community can mourn the loss of Amora and reaffirm their commitment to preventing future tragedies. The tragedy of Amora Bain Carson is a story that demands to be told, remembered, and reflected upon. It is a story of profound and immeasurable loss, of unspeakable cruelty inflicted upon a defenseless child, and of systemic failures that allowed a vulnerable life to be tragically extinguished. But it is also a story that compels us to confront uncomfortable truths and to embrace our collective responsibility to protect children from harm. Amora's life, though tragically brief, serves as a powerful and enduring call to action. We must cultivate a heightened sense of vigilance in recognizing the often subtle signs of child abuse, ensuring that concerns are reported and investigated promptly and thoroughly. We must work tirelessly to strengthen the systems designed to protect children, holding those with a history of violence accountable, and implementing safeguards to prevent them from endangering the innocent. We must foster a society where the well-being of children is paramount, where they are nurtured, cherished, and shielded from harm. The memory of Amora Bain Carson should not be solely one of despair and sorrow, but also one of unwavering commitment and resolute determination. Let her story inspire us to create a world where no child is subjected to such horrific abuse, a world where every child is afforded the opportunity to live a life filled with love, safety, and boundless hope.